Good afternoon. My name is Barbara Danforth, and I am a member of the City Club Board of Directors. It is certainly my privilege this afternoon to welcome to the City Club Friday Forum Dr.Cathy J. Cohen. Dr. Cohen is an author, feminist, academic, and social activist whose work has focused on the African American experience. She currently serves as the Deputy Provost for Graduate Education and Professor of Political Science at the University of Chicago. Dr. Cohen is the former director of the Center for the Study of Race, Politics, and Culture, also at the University of Chicago. She began her academic career at Yale University, where she was a tenured professor. Dr. Cohen is the author of Boundaries of Blackness, AIDS and the Breakdown of Black Politics, and co-editor of Women Transforming Politics, an alternative reader. Her recently published book, Democracy Remixed, Black Youth and the Future of American Politics, offers an authoritative analysis of the state of black youth in America today. Professor Cohen was the chief investigator of the Black Youth Project, a groundbreaking national survey funded through a major grant from the Ford Foundation. The project explores the attitudes, actions, and decision-making of black youth by including their lives, their ideas, and their voices. The Black Youth Project's website is a cyber resource center for black youth and all those who are committed to enriching their lives. As an academic activist, Dr. Cohen frequently writes and speaks about gender, sexuality, class, ethnicity, and their interrelatedness and connection to power. This approach puts her in a class of intellectuals who work to have social and public policy influence the lives of marginalized groups in a positive way. Professor Cohen is the recipient of numerous awards, including the Robert Wood Johnson Investigators Award, the Robert Wood Johnson Scholars in Health Policy Research Fellowship, and 2 major grants from the Ford Foundation. In addition to her demanding academic schedule, Dr. Cohen is a political and social activist and serves on several national and local advisory and governance boards. Dr. Cohen, who is from Toledo, received her Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Miami of Ohio and her PhD from the University of Michigan. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Cathy Cohen.
Thank you. Well, first of all, let me say good afternoon, and I want to thank Barbara for a really wonderful and thorough introduction. I want to thank the City Club of Cleveland for giving me this chance to talk with you about my recent book, Democracy Remixed, Black Youth and the Future of American Politics. And I have to say I'm especially happy to be in my home state of Ohio. As she mentioned, I'm a child of Toledo, Ohio, just west on I-80, and went to Miami University, Oxford, Ohio for undergrad. So it is nice to be at home. I actually just arrived after spending a few days with my parents, so happy to be here. Now, today I'm actually hoping we can spend our time together thinking and talking about the plight of black youth today. This is really an especially, I think, pertinent topic given that the nation is rightfully focused on and outraged by the murder of young Trayvon Martin. As I'm sure most of you know by now, Trayvon was the 17-year-old unarmed black teen killed in Sanford, Florida. He was killed by a neighborhood watch captain because he said that Trayvon looked suspicious. Now, what clearly has many, including myself, up in arms is we can't understand how does a young black man walking down the street in a gated community with a cell phone, a bottle of iced tea, and a bag of Skittles looked suspicious, warranting his murder. Now, the murder of Trayvon Martin is a tragedy for the country, and of course our hearts and prayers go out to his family. I'm hoping, however, that we might use this moment, we might think of it as a teachable moment, to reflect on the lives of young black people, providing for greater understanding and a greater sense of urgency to improve their lived conditions. Now, to that point, I actually want to take us back to 2009, when the nation actually witnessed yet another senseless murder, the murder of Darian Albert in Chicago, Illinois. It was September 24th, 2009, when Darian Albert, a 16-year-old black honor roll student in Chicago, was brutally beaten to death on his way home from school. We know the specifics of Darian's brutal murder because it was caught on footage from a cell phone, a video that actually was seen around the world as it was shown both by broadcast media and posted on internet sites such as YouTube. Now, if you view the video, you can see that Darian was hit repeatedly with a board and then stomped while on the ground by a group of black boys and young men. Now, all reports of his murder frame Darian as an innocent victim. He was described as a grandmama's boy who loved wrestling, basketball, and shopping. His mother said he was a great kid, a good student. She recounts that she and Darian were getting ready to start a plan for college. Darian was not part of a gang and seemed to have no connection to the young men fighting with fists and boards, other than the fact that some attended the same school as Albert, and on that day they were fighting on the path he used to travel home from school. Now, there are, I think, many things that are horrifying and revolting on the video documenting the killing of Darian Albert. First and foremost is the brutality of Darian's death. It is sickening to watch this young man being struck by a splintered wooden plank in what appears to be the back of his head, knocking him unconscious. To watch him fall to the ground where his body hits the hard concrete, forcing him to endure yet another blow. To watch him gain consciousness and try to get up, only to be punched in the face and then hit again with another wooden board. And then to watch his limp body sink to the ground for the last time, where individuals surround him, kicking and stomping him. It is hard to watch this video, imagining the physical and emotional pain Darian endured, blindsided and confused, as he merely tried to walk home from school, the target of such violence by individuals with whom he had no fundamental tie. If someone watching this video is actually able to take their eyes away from what is happening to Darian, they will also see images that actually fill out the gloom of this event. For example, one can see and hear cars blowing their horns at kids fighting in the streets as the drivers, either too scared or unconcerned, refuse to stop and instead try desperately to make their way through this conflict. Also on the tape, one sees young black men, some without shirts, fighting each other with fists and boards, intent on hurting those they perceive as enemies. Finally, at the end of the short but devastating video, one hears the cries of other young black people trying to help their friend Darian. They beg him to get up, shouting, "Darian, get up, please." Unfortunately, their attempts to help Darian come too late. In the screams and efforts of these young black people to save one of their own, we are confronted with at least part of the reality of their lives. While the young people who try to save Darian were not killed or beaten this time, they have to wonder, when will they be the target of unsuspected violence? When will a bus ride or a walk home from school be their last, as they are killed by a stray bullet or a board to the back of their head? When will a walk through a neighborhood be their last, as someone deems them suspicious and uses a gun to end their young life? And maybe more importantly, why is no one, anyone, willing to protect them, as any moral person, parent, or nation does for their children? Are their lives not worthy of protection? Are they not full members of our political community? Does anyone care about these young black people? Now, I start talks on my book not with statistics, which I will get to in a moment, but by recounting Darian Albert's death, because I worry that while listening to or even looking at statistics, we forget, even momentarily, about the precious lives of young black people who are at the heart of those statistics. I worry that when we are only presented with statistics, we forget how significant and different each young black person is and how painful it is for their family and our community to lose young people like Darian Albert or Trayvon Martin. So as you listen to the statistics that I will present throughout the rest of this talk, I ask that you remember your son, daughter, niece, nephew, friend, or colleague who actually live these statistics daily. Okay, so now the discussion of structural conditions facing black youth has been pretty rehearsed, almost with regularity. Many people know, for example, that black youth suffer disproportionately from poverty, HIV/AIDS, childhood obesity, incarceration, unemployment, and of course the list could go on. For example, the work of the Sentencing Project has brought to light many of the racial disparities that exist in our criminal justice system. Research has shown, for example, that black males born today, it's expected that 1 in 3 will spend time in prison at some point in their lives, and that on any given day, 1 in 8 young black men in their 20s is in jail. Incarceration, however, is not only an issue that threatens young black men. Black women are 3 times as likely as white women to be in jail or in prison, and 30% of the women incarcerated under state or federal jurisdiction are black. Beyond incarceration, as a nation, we have to explain why we allow so many black children to live in poverty. While approximately 11% of non-Hispanic white children lived in poverty in 2008, the poverty rate for black children was 35%, 1 in 3. Furthermore, when we ask about the number of children living in low-income families, we find that a majority of black children live under such conditions, 61%, compared to 27% of white children. We also know, for example, that black youth and their families have been especially hard hit by the recession. A 2008 Demos report stated that, and I quote, young African American men have the highest rate of unemployment among young people and the lowest percentage of individuals participating in the workforce, end of quote. And as others have noted, the combination of the loss of manufacturing jobs, the use of predatory lending practices, unparalleled foreclosures, and the shocking drop in property values has meant that black youth and their families face not a recession, but really a silent depression, and the loss of really any generational progress for young black Americans. Now, again, I could spend all of our time recounting such disturbing statistics that point undoubtedly to the dangerous and defeated lived conditions that far too many young black people face. And clearly, my perspective on the plight of young black people today is one that says that the structural conditions they face severely constrain the opportunities for advancement they confront. Now, rightly, I should say, some might challenge my focus and suggest that we should pay less attention to the structural barriers black youth face and instead concentrate on the significant numbers of young blacks who have found a way at least to persist and optimally succeed in the midst of such crushing conditions. And I'm sure some of the young people in the room represent that. Let me say, I think it is right to applaud those young people, but we must also face the fact that morally the country has failed many young black people who are more likely to live in poverty, who are at risk when they go to school because of uncontrolled violence in their neighborhoods, who when they show up at school are less likely to graduate than their white counterparts, and if they graduate will face higher rates of unemployment even with a college degree. The question I believe that confronts us in this room and the nation as a whole, and really was the driving force for my book, is what will we do to to radically improve the lived conditions of young black Americans. Now, that said, I also want to suggest that we cannot move forward, at least productively, without centering our political strategy on the ideas, insights, and leadership of young people. We can no longer deny their centrality, in particular the centrality of young black people, to the politics of black communities, and more importantly, maybe to the politics of the nation. Now, the importance of young people to our current political process was highlighted in 2008 at every rally for then-candidate Barack Obama, where thousands of young people, especially those in college, came to visibly demonstrate their support for his candidacy and their potential political influence. However, beyond the kind of college kids for Obama crowd, other segments of the youth population in this country, especially marginalized black youth, serve an important role as an indicator, really, of the current strength and future functioning of our democracy. They might be democracy's miner's canary, to borrow from Guinier and Torres, letting us know where there are weaknesses in our democratic practice. Unfortunately, in our political system, we rarely ask young people what they think or involve them in the political process outside of recruiting them as voters on Election Day. To assess the range of attitudes of black youth and that they have on kind of various conditions that they face, I started the Black Youth Project. And as we noted earlier, the Black Youth Project is really now a multidimensional program committed to amplifying the voice, knowledge, and political engagement of young black Americans. Most of our work is actually done online at a website called theblackyouthproject.com. Now, the Black Youth Project started, however, really as a research project designed to examine the attitudes of young people, especially black youth ages 15 to 25. And it's that data from the Black Youth Project and a similar data set, the Mobilization and Change Project, that I actually want to just review briefly. And I can say more about those data sets later in questions and answers. So let's just turn to the data. On the topic of the government, we find that on most measures, black youth actually hold slightly more negative views of the government, or at least they did in 2005. For example, the majority of black youth, 56%, believe that the leaders in government care very little about people like them. Now, this is compared to just a slight difference of 52% for Latino youth and 44% of white youth, and all of these differences are statistically significant. Similarly, black and Latino young people are more likely than white youth to agree with the statement, the government is run by a few big interests looking out for themselves and their friends. 66% of black youth, 62% of Latino youth, and 50% of white youth agree with this assessment. Now, to more kind of fully interrogate how young people think about their place in the larger political community, we asked respondents if they agree with this statement. Generally, I feel like a full and equal citizen in this country with all the rights and protections that other people have. Findings from our national survey suggest that actually a majority of young black people feel like full and equal citizens, 60%. That's some level good news, right? But this was 23 percentage points less than the 83% of white youth who felt like full and equal citizens, and the 70% of Latino youth who felt that they held such status. When respondents to the Black Youth Project were asked more racially explicit questions about the government's treatment of blacks and black youth, we found even greater disparity between the attitudes of black youth and in particular those of white youth. For example, nearly half, 48% of black youth agree with this statement. The government treats most immigrants better than it treats most black people born in this country. Now, as we would expect, much smaller proportions of Latino youth, 18%, and white youth, 29%, agree with that statement. When we probed the kind of perceived discrimination that black youth experience in other aspects of their lives, we found a similar pattern of large gaps in attitudes between, in particular, white and black youth. For example, when we asked if respondents agreed with the statement, It's hard for young black people to get ahead because they face so much discrimination. 61% of black respondents agreed, 45% of Latino respondents agreed, and 43% of white respondents agreed. When we asked respondents if they agreed with the statement, on average, black youth receive a poorer education than white youth. Again, a majority, 54% of black youth concurred with the statement, compared to 31% of white youth and 40% of Latino youth. Interestingly, there was, in fact, one area where there was overwhelming agreement among all the youth surveyed. It was in their assessment of how the police treat black youth. The majority of all young people across racial groups agreed with the statement that, quote, on average, the police discriminate much more against black youth than they do against white youth. 79% of black youth agreed, 73% of Latino youth agreed, and 63% of white youth agreed that the police discriminate much more against black youth. Now, the discussion to this point has largely been based on data that were gathered prior to the phenomenon we now call President Barack Obama from Chicago. I just had to mention that. As we might expect, the election of the nation's first African-American president has brought with it really an infinite number of expectations, not only for the country, but also for how kind of an Obama presidency might impact young black people, those at the heart of this research. I want to be clear that there's kind of no denying the symbolic power of the election of Barack Obama to the hopes and dreams of most black Americans. One need only refer to the images of older blacks crying as they watched his inauguration, never believing in their lifetime that they would witness such an event in the United States of America. Such hope, optimism, and pride in Obama was also displayed among young black Americans as they wore "My President is Black" t-shirts, wrote poems, see, they know what I'm talking about, performed spoken word, and performed rap songs about their new president. The belief in the candidacy and presidency of Barack Obama was made tangible as young black people turned out to vote in 2008. Numerous sources have found that young black Americans, and specifically young black Americans, went to the polls in record numbers in 2008. Data from the U.S. Census Bureau indicates that 52% of black youth ages 18 to 24 voted in 2008. And I want to put this in perspective. This is the highest turnout among 18 to 24-year-olds of any racial or ethnic group since the passage of the 26th Amendment granting 18-year-olds the right to vote, right? Also, it marks the first time that a majority of black youth participated in any national election. So the question I think I want to briefly explore is the degree to which President Obama has altered not only the voting patterns of young blacks, but possibly the political attitudes of young people around very important issues like the issue of racism. The data suggests that while young people have embraced Barack Obama and his promise of change you can believe in, they still recognize the state, meaning the government in which they operate, and the state that the president heads. These are young people who may feel proud of Barack Obama and the country's ability to elect its first black president, but they also seem to recognize that the racial order that shapes many of the opportunities to which they have access is still standing. Two quick data points from the Mobilization and Change study, I think, underscore this point, and this was taken after the election of Barack Obama. First, when we asked young people ages 18 to 30 this time, after the election, if racism remains a major problem for the country, 69% of blacks agreed, 51% of Latino youth agreed, compared to only 32% of white youth. Second, when we asked if blacks had achieved racial equality now, you know what's coming, right? 51%, a slight majority of white youth said yes, blacks had achieved racial equality, compared to 13% of black youth and 32% of Latino youth. Now, all of the data suggests that many young black Americans stand really, I would say, at the crossroads of the symbolic hope embodied in the election of President Obama, and often the pain reality of failed or merely adequate schools, constant policing and incarceration, pervasive violence in their neighborhoods, shrinking economic opportunities, and the demonization of their choices, cultures, and selves. They stand at the crossroads really waiting to see which way the tide will turn. These young people have not given up on the promise of our democracy, but they are sorting out the conflicting messages this country is sending. On the one hand, the uplifting promise of equality witnessed in the election of Barack Obama, and on the other hand, the renewed second-class citizenship of black people, underscored by such examples as the killing of Trayvon Martin, or the government's unwillingness, for example, to devote the resources needed to save and support the survivors of Hurricane Katrina. Now, just a side note, I often talk about Hurricane Katrina as this generation's Rodney King moment, when they saw how expendable black lives and black bodies can actually be. The data from both the Black Youth Project and the Mobilization and Change study indicates that black youth continue to have a cynical assessment of race relations in the country, as well as their status as full citizens. Ironically, their assessment of race relations today is actually often contrasted with media representations of a post-racial America. It's been suggested by some in some media reports that with the election of Barack Obama, we have moved past the country's racist past to a new era of equal rights where merit and effort will win the day. Again, unfortunately, the murder of Trayvon Martin is a sad reminder that post-racial America remains a dream. In conclusion, let me say that I recognize that the brief presentation of statistics can be both overwhelming and sometimes not very helpful in trying to map out how these numbers correspond to the daily challenges and choices faced by black youth across this country. However, the statistics presented should give us a clearer sense of the reality of young black people. A concern with the lived condition represented in these statistics should also lead us back to trying to understand the factors that led to the death of young black men like Darian Albert and Trayvon Martin. So while the death of Darian and Trayvon may seem like extreme cases, I believe they each underscore really the tenuous position of black youth today. Darian Albert and Trayvon Martin did everything we asked of them. They went to school, avoided any gang affiliation, involved themselves in productive activities like wrestling and football, and they each thought about how to better their lives, planning to go to college. Darian and Trayvon deserve our sympathy and the outrage that accompanies their death. However, if our concern only focuses on young black people who are seemingly good and productive, the innocent victims of black communities, those who have used the opportunities provided to better their lot, we would do little really to highlight the complicated and contradictory experience of being young and black in the United States today, and to do the work that I believe we must do to change their lives. We must pay attention to the challenges facing all young black people, especially those whose lives are filled with contradiction as they struggle to do better than the generations who came before them. As the tape of Darian Albert's murder makes clear, there is no monolithic experience of young black people today. Darian Albert was killed by other young black men. However, if we only seek to explain the murder of Darian Albert by focusing on the actions of a group of young black men, 5 of whom were convicted of killing Darian Albert, we miss an opportunity to address the numerous factors which created an environment in which the life of one young black man is made irrelevant in the middle of mindless rage on the part of other young black men. This is not an attempt to excuse those accused of killing Darian Albert, but instead an attempt to understand the reality they encounter daily, one that could produce such reckless disregard for human life, even momentarily. Thus, I believe we are called, and I'm saying called, at this moment, to work to build a movement that can save and transform the lives of Black youth. Toward that goal, a central part of our work must be acknowledging and treating young Blacks as equal and full members of the larger political community, whose perspectives are central to how we understand the success and failure of our politics. When we include Black youth as full and equal members, it means acknowledging their worth and that we will pursue a politics that reflects that understanding. As equal members of our community, their future is literally our future. Their suffering is our suffering. Their death is our death. It is ultimately the question of how to promote the membership and participation of Black youth in the life of our communities, at the heart of our democracy, which is the task in front of us and the driving theme in my book, Democracy Remixed. We must therefore expand the civic capacity of young Black Americans to fully engage in the politics of the country, where decisions about the distribution of resources and the country's priorities are debated and decided. If we start by ensuring the political equality of young Blacks and demanding the resources and institutional arrangements necessary for an environment, and I quote, an environment in which people can develop their potential and lead productive, creative lives in accord with their needs and interests, then we have begun the process of transforming their lives and the country. As a nation, we must renew our commitment to Black youth, following their lead as they help us to reconceptualize and remix what constitutes meaningful politics and community membership, where lives are valued, protected, and enriched, and where all are allowed, encouraged, and provided the means to be full and equal members of our community. This, of course, won't be easy work, but when we do it, we will not only save the lives of young people like Darian Albert and Trayvon Martin, we will better the lot of all young Black people and enrich our democracy. Thank you.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we are listening to a Friday forum featuring Dr. Cathy Cohen, professor of political science at the University of Chicago and author of Democracy Remixed, Black Youth and the Future of American Politics. We will return to our speaker in a minute for the traditional City Club questions. Please formulate questions for our speaker now, and remember that questions should be brief and to the point. We remind you that members and guests alike are welcome to attend City Club forums, and we invite everyone listening to join the City Club and support its work. We welcome all of you here and those listening to WCPN 90.3 FM, WCLV, WTAM, or one of the many radio stations across the country. Our television broadcast partners are WVIZ, PBS, IdeaStream. Television broadcasts of the City Club are made possible by Cleveland State University and PNC. Our live webcast is supported by the University of Akron. This year, 2012, the City Club of Cleveland turns 100 years old. There are several programs scheduled. For more information, visit the 100th Anniversary tab on our website. We would like to welcome guests today at tables hosted by Baker Hostetler and Kent State University. Thank you for your support. We also are pleased to welcome students who are here as part of the City Club student program. Participation of these students is made possible by a generous gift from the Jeffrey David Epstein Memorial Student Fund. With us today are students from the Cleveland School of the Arts, High Tech Academy, JFK High School, St. Martin's de Porres High School, and Montessori High School. Will the students please stand to be recognized? Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Today is the Karen Faith Witt and A.H. Weinstein Memorial Forum on the persecution of peoples, made possible with generous gifts from the late Dale Solly in memory of his friend Karen Faith Witt, and from Norman Weinstein in memorial of his father, A.H. Weinstein. Now we would like to return to our speaker for our traditional City Club question and answer period. We welcome questions from everyone, including guests. Holding the microphones today is City Club Program Director Carrie Miller, and Special Initiatives Coordinator Phil Williams. We will return to our speaker.
Dr. Cohen,
Yes.
you've pointed out the many challenges that are facing young black men and, of course, women throughout the country and in Cleveland. Some have claimed that the dropout rate from high school for black young people is extremely high, certainly in comparison to the rest of the community. What do you think can be done to change that dropout rate so that a greater number of black young people actually complete their high school and go on to perhaps even higher education?
That's a great question. Thank you very much. So as you point out, in many urban cities, we see non-completion rates, and I'm going to use that language for a reason, of 50% or higher, in particular among young black men. So I don't think many of us expected in the 21st century that we would still be talking about 50% of young black people, or young black men in particular, not finishing school. Now there are different takes on this. Some would say that these young men are dropping out through their own agency, unable maybe to complete the curriculum. Others would suggest that there is a process of pushing out also, that very early on some young people are tracked. We have found any number of studies that suggest, in fact, young black men in particular, but young blacks at a disproportionate rate in, for example, special ed classrooms where teachers were unable or unwilling to deal with disciplinary issues maybe, and decided, in fact, that those students would be better off in certain types of classrooms. There's a question about the curriculum and the relevance and interest of the curriculum to many young black people. Is there a way, in fact, to make the curriculum more interesting? There is a question of how do we engage parents also, so that, in fact, parents are more engaged in the process, because we know if parents are involved, young people are more likely to stay in schools. So I think there are a number of different initiatives ongoing, some of them led by the President and the Department of Education under Arne Duncan, where we seek to kind of highlight those schools who are doing an effective job in educating and engaging young people, keeping them in the process, and provide resources and incentives for those schools who struggle in this area. I don't think there's an easy kind of answer, as you can tell as I go on, to say that if we just do this one thing, we'll be able to keep more young people and young black men in particular in the education system. I think the first and the most important step is recognizing that this is a significant issue, that it's not just about their choice, but it's also about the structure of education, and trying out any number of new incentives and programs meant to keep them there and to kind of hold on to them. So that's the kind of nuanced, complicated answer. I think, and I'll say one last thing, at least in Chicago, we're starting to see more success with some of the charter schools, where you have smaller classrooms, more teachers who actually know the students and are able to kind of watch and make sure and follow up when they're missing from class. Sorry.
My name is Ian Page, and I'm from John F. Kennedy. And my question to you was that in your interview with Windy City Times,
Yes.
you had stated about how black youth don't see the most importance in LBGT issues, right? And I can agree with you on that we don't see the importance of that through my fellow peers. So how do you propose that we can do something about that?
Right. So Ian, right? Because we met earlier. Fab. It's very nice for you to ask a question. Thank you, Ian. I guess I want to clarify what I think I was saying. You're never sure what you're saying in an interview, but what I think I was saying. I think they were talking about LGBT issues, and was that the most important issue for many young black people? And I think for LGBT youth, being LGBT youth, I'm sorry, lesbian, gay, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender issues. Sorry about that. So for LGBT youth, I think those types of issues, LGBT issues, are clearly critically important. But for any number of other youth, when we ask about the most important issues, they talk about, education in their classrooms, they talk about violence in their neighborhoods, they talk about issues of trying to secure a job. And I think what I was saying is I think even among LGBT youth, sometimes we forget that those issues are of critical importance also. So we don't want to suggest that one identity, a sexual orientation defines who that person is completely. So that's one of the issues I was talking about. But I do think we also should be concerned about what we might consider to be at times the level of intolerance that we see in some of the data around LGBT issues and black youth. So for example, in the Black Youth Project research, when we ask about things like same-sex marriage, young blacks had the highest rate of saying they were against same-sex marriage. Now for those of us who believe in fact that equality among everyone is a critical fight, then we have to figure out how to intervene effectively and engage young black people who might say that they oppose LGBT issues about the importance of LGBT issues. So I think that was what I was trying to get at in the interview that you read, that we have to kind of think about more creative ways and, again, relevant ways to engage young black people along a range of issues, including LGBT issues. Does that help? Okay, thanks.
Hi, my name is Taylor. I have a question from one of our Twitter followers who's been listening on IdeaStream today.
Oh, great.
Julia asks, is the goal perceived improvement? Do changing perceptions indicate actual differences in the U.S.?
So perceived improvement meaning how young people think about these issues. I think that's what the...
That's the whole
question.
Okay,
yes, what the tweeter is saying. I think there's a connection. Many of us who study these things believe that there's a connection between perception and lived reality, right? So I think the idea is that if, in fact, we could change the lived reality for many young black people, that they would also perceive those differences. So we can objectively measure certain things like poverty and education rates of graduation or jobless rates, but we also want to be paying attention to how young people internalize that, understand that, and abstract from those lived realities to things, for example, do I feel like a full and equal citizen? So I think clearly we want to change the lived reality with the hopes that that will also impact people's perception of their place in this democracy. Yeah.
Hi, Dr. Cohen. I'm Wesley Bacon from Cleveland School of the Arts, and my question is, what similarities does the murders of Emmett Till and Trayvon Martin share, and does this strengthen the statistical result from the black race that we have not yet reached equality?
What's your name?
Wesley Bacon.
Wesley, that's a heck of a question. Thank you very much. Wow. We need to give Wesley a hand for that question. I mean, yeah. Wesley is a great question. I was actually just talking with someone about, someone talked about, is this the Emmett Till of the 21st century, right? And I think there comes so many parallels here, and I'll just try to draw out a couple, one is, of course, the danger for young black men in particular when they are perceived, this goes back to the question of perceived, even if they don't do anything, as crossing a line that this society, in particular, the racial dynamics of this society dictates, puts young black men in a category where they are perceived to be dangerous, out of line, and a threat. And when that line is perceived to be crossed, it seems, in fact, that it emboldens individuals to put those young black men back in line, often with the loss of their lives, right? And so I think the parallel between Emmett Till and Trayvon Martin is one that I think we'll be talking about for a very long time. The other parallel, it seems to me, and maybe this is because I'm a parent, which is the sense that even after the death of Emmett Till, when parents do all they can to kind of instruct, we were just talking about this, and socialize their children so that they can have some level of safety out in what we know to be a dangerous world, right? So when you say, you know, if someone stops you, don't fight back, don't push back, keep your head down, say yes, sir. What Trayvon Martin, I think, shows us in particular is that still doesn't protect them, right? That we can tell our kids to act in a certain way, and in particular our young men, to diminish themselves, to save their lives. And even when you implement that plan, someone can see you as suspicious, not because of what you do, but because of who they perceive you are. And that can be the end of your life. So I think Emmett Till is a very important example that we might reference when thinking about Trayvon Martin. I'm going to just add one other component to your question, which is what I want to make sure that we don't do in this moment is to only talk about those cases that are so glaringly, right, and racist, right? Because I think that, I don't want to say that's easy. It's painful for all of us to kind of recount and think about what happened to Trayvon Martin. But the reason I want to introduce Darian Albert also is because to introduce the complexity of what we experience in black communities, right? What we will also do to our own. And so how do we also engage in a conversation about that type of death and what our responsibility is to changing that type of brutality, right? But I think it was a great question. Thank you very much.
Dr. Cohen, I appreciate your talk today in regards to the plight of the black male. As one who has had to live this talk, your explanation and expansion of what goes on is appreciated. And I also like to say that the explanation about Darian Albert with regard to the brutality of how it happened to him. We're looking at Trayvon Martin, but the brutality that happened to Darian Albert is starting because it was from within. But the question I have is, can the education system be held accountable for teaching humanity, for teaching people to have a sense of human beingness and value, that life that you're attempting to take, is it really worth the effort to do that? Is there a wrong and right there?
Right.
And how responsible is education for that?
Right. So first of all, that's a great question. Thank you very much. I think education has a responsibility to do that, but I think there are lots of other components that have to be a part of that picture of how we talk about and teach humanity, or maybe even questioning where we go wrong in taking the humanity out of what I think young kids know from the beginning, right? Another being, they care about their friend cries, they go over to their friend and ask what's wrong. I mean, I have a 6-year-old, so I've watched this process, right? This sense of empathy. But I think you're right. Education has a role, and I think your question, for me at least, speaks to this greater issue of what are we doing to the educational system and the education curriculum that we provide, in particular, to young kids of color in public schools. I am all for holding school systems accountable for reading and math. But I know that kids in private schools get art, they get phys ed, they get a rounded education that we would say bespeaks of the best of teaching the humanities in this country. And I'm a little worried that we somehow think that young kids or kids in public education, primarily black and Latino kids, don't deserve a well-rounded education that includes significant instruction and discussion of human issues, right? My connection to someone, my moral responsibility to someone, the idea of empathy. So I think education has a role there. But I think, what happens in the home also has a role. How often do we talk to our young people not only about, did you finish your homework, but how do we talk about the Trayvon Martin issue? And then how do we connect it to the Darian Albert issue? right? So how do we begin to show these examples of racism in the country that still exists, of the brutality that can even exist within our own communities, and their responsibility in kind of providing a different type of example of what can be. So I would say education, I would say the home, and of course we would have to talk about the media and culture. I am actually, I dare say, a fan of some rap music. You know, I'm a little old, but yes, I am. So I'm not going to denigrate all rap music as contributing to this dehumanization that I think we've seen. I do think, though, that the culture and media at times participates in promoting certain types of images and examples of success and hyper-consumerism and consumption as something that young people should strive for, and they place that on such a high pedestal that we forget that there are other ways in which one can be successful and other images of success and glory that we want to highlight that, again, underscore our connection to other people. So I think you're right. But I think every component of what we're doing with young people, every domain that touches their lives has to be accountable for teaching kind of a human connection and a humanitarian commitment. And I think we all have to look at ourselves in the mirror and make sure that we're leading that type of life as an example for the young people in our lives.
Hi, Dr. Cohen. My name is Eva Barrett from Cleveland School of the Arts. And I wanted to ask, what do you think can be done to help young people, young blacks in particular, recognize that their involvement in society, from voting to being updated on current events, help them recognize that that is crucial to the advancement of the human race?
Sure. That's a great question also. So one of the things I think, I've tried to, even though I'm standing here, I tried not to take the lead, but in fact to listen to young people and follow their lead. So I mentioned before that the Black Youth Project started as a research project. It was a research project. It was going to be a survey. I was going to write a book, which I did, right, like every academic does, and call it a day, right? And it turned out that I was working with about 12 undergraduate and graduate students on this project, and we worked on it for a year. And they said, we can't just write the book. We have to put something up on the web so that the young people we talk to, I should have been there also, can find out what we're learning. So we built a very static website, very academic again, very text heavy. And then they came back about 6 months, maybe 9 months later and said, you know what, we can do better. We can create a really vibrant website where, in fact, young black people can speak for themselves. So we have about 15 bloggers. They they write about whatever they want. There's no censoring. Sometimes I like what they say, sometimes I don't. It's a very vibrant website. It includes research, it includes action, and there are kind of 3 pillars. It's about, we say, knowledge, because you can't act unless you know something. It's about voice, making sure young black people can speak for themselves, and it's about action, because without action you never transform power. And I think if we could find more sites like that, more curriculum like that in schools, I think we would begin to see both those of us who are older and also young people would find their voice and their leadership, begin to make those connections. We would recognize the importance and the insightfulness of their analysis and begin to, I think, let them lead towards, again, a more humanitarian political agenda that, of course, would advance, their lives, but would be connected to, I think, bettering the country and bettering the democracy. So I would say if we can provide some spaces for young people to do their work, we would be in a much better position. Yeah. Hi.
Mary Buchanan Gilbert, and being a young black person interested in politics and want to be a politician one day, how do you think we can get them interested in careers like that? Because I know I have one friend who's interested in politics but doesn't want to go into it as a career. So how do you feel that would be more of a thing we can do?
Right. So we've had a chance through focus groups and lots of, thank you for the question, it was a great question, through focus groups and through surveys to talk to young black people about politics. And it's a very interesting thing. When you ask them about politics, they, as you saw in the numbers, tend to have a kind of negative perception of politics. And what's interesting is it goes across racial groups, but it's also not necessarily tied to race. And one of the things we've learned is a number of the young black people that we've talked to have grown up, for example, with black mayors or black representatives, and they still have failing schools. So to them, just having a black person in office doesn't mean that their lives are necessarily going to change. And I think that they have a skepticism about what politicians actually do. What was interesting when we asked them about kind of how you would really change your life or change your communities, they were much more interested and supportive of community organizations, community organizers. And so it may be that maybe that's the avenue we might want to try to open up for these young people. Because I think, of course, we want leaders, and we want leaders committed to those communities. But I think we want a range of individuals engaged in changing the lives. So we want politicians, we want organizers, we want individuals opening up businesses, we want people leading new schools and charter schools. So we want to make sure that we provide opportunities, a range of opportunities. And maybe when you and others of your friends become elected and you show how good politicians can actually be instead of corrupt, maybe that will in fact, I'm not saying people are corrupt, but maybe that will attract even more young people to want to be politicians. Thank you.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we have been listening to a Friday forum featuring Dr. Cathy J. Cohen, Professor of Political Science at the University of Chicago. Thank you, Dr. Cohen. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This forum is now adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.